Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this very exciting webinar that we have lined up for you. On behalf of Professor Glover, the Dean of the School of Clinical Medicine, and Professor Nkama, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on academic bullying. And we hope you enjoy the lineup of speakers that we have lined up for you this afternoon. So Professor Glover has issues with load shedding, so she may join us as the meeting progresses. But we're going to start the program with Professor Sidat, who's our keynote speaker. Professor Soraya Sidat is a distinguished professor of psychiatry and the executive head of the Department of Psychiatry at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, Stellenbosch University. She holds the South African Research Chair in Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and directs the South African Medical Research Council Unit on the Genomics Brain Disorders. Just to remind you that please do not post questions in the chat function. Please post questions in the Q&A. We will take 2 questions after our 2 main speakers and the rest of the questions at the end of the presentation. So the questions may be answered on the Q&A function, or it may be answered at the end. So please post your questions in Q&A. If you have issues with technical issues, you can post it in the chat. So I'd like to welcome Professor Sidat from Stellenbosch and hand over to her. Thank you, Professor Sidat. Professor Sidat, you need to unmute.
Good evening. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
So I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak. And while I get my presentation up on screen, I want to maybe start off by saying that the COVID-19 pandemic has cast a spotlight on staff occupational wellness, but there has been far less focus on a parallel epidemic that has been with us for a long time. In fact, bullying and harassment in medicine are arguably as old as the profession itself. Are you able to see my slide?
No, not as yet.
Okay, so let me try again. Apologies for that. Here goes. So you should be able to see it up on screen now.
Yes, we can.
So as I was saying, this is an epidemic that has been with us for as old as the profession itself. It's essentially what has been referred to as an unspoken emergency and medicine shame problem. Here in South Africa, the conversation around workplace bullying probably only reached a crescendo about 5 years ago. And in fact, it was at that time that I became aware of the pervasive nature of workplace bullying. And it was when a medical intern known as Dr. Yumna Musa posted her experiences of workplace bullying in this YouTube video that went viral.
My name is Yumna Musa, and I want to tell you why I don't want to be a doctor anymore. Last year, I worked under a man who sexually harassed me. It wasn't only me, it wasn't always sexual, it was open, and it was every day. Humiliating and degrading lower-ranking doctors is a big part of medical education. So he is an award-winning teacher. I had to say something. I had my phone with me while the hospital management explained that actually there was nothing wrong with my supervisor's behavior. First, the racism.
Are you defining yourself as kind
Well, it's tricky for me. I don't want to.
But no, but you're saying that this is a racist problem. So you must pick a race, and then we work from there. In the last 2 years, as far as I can see, there's been 16 whites, 42 Indians, 33 blacks, and 10 colored, of which there's one I'm going to classify you as colored whether you like it or not. In this diverse group of people in your group, he must have experienced the same process because he's part of he's colored, he's in the department of
An example of something I mean is to say to a particular black person, you being stupid like a black person. So it's not to all the black people, it's to that person, but it's referring to their race in the insult.
Okay.
And that is
Okay. Okay. So individualized.
The race is
okay.
Yes.
I'm racist. I won't be racist once. Every white man is.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's not there.
That's racism. No.
And others, if she individualized, like, okay, let's use sexual harassment. Because sexual harassment, the definition is something that you personally feel uncomfortable with. So if he makes a remark and I'm comfortable with that remark, then it's not sexual.
It doesn't have to make every woman.
So most of us know that workplace bullying is unprofessional conduct and that it's reprehensible and wrong. And what I'm going to do in the short space of time that I have available is to identify and highlight issues of workplace bullying, define and scope the problem as it relates to academic medicine. So I know the topic for this evening's panel discussion relates to bullying within the wider academic sector, so tertiary institutions. And I'm going to focus specifically on bullying within academic medicine, but I think much of what I will say applies to the wider arena of academia in tertiary settings. I'm also going to highlight some of the drivers and risk factors for bullying and harassment in the academic.
Okay, I think we may have lost Professor Sidat. Professor Sidat, are you still with us? Okay, I think we have lost Professor Sidat, so we'll perhaps just give her a few minutes to log in. Marianne, can we perhaps just contact her? She may be talking without realizing that she's lost a signal. Okay, so just as the discussion was getting a little bit exciting, we lose the speaker. So unfortunately, we live in South Africa and we have to live with load shedding. And I think that has affected two of our panelists this evening. We'll give Professor Sidat a few minutes to get back. If she doesn't get back in the next few minutes, then we'll proceed with the next speaker, which is Dr. Tertiary Naidu. So we'll just give her a minute or two to see if she can join. Right. I think we'll proceed with the next speaker, and then when Professor Sidat joins, we can slot her presentation in appropriately. So our next speaker is one of our UKZN academics, Dr. Tertiary Naidu, who will speak about the prototype of a perpetrator and victim. Tertiary is a head of department clinical psychology, King Dinizulu Hospital, as well as a lecturer in the Department of Behavioral Medicine at UKZN. Dr. Naidu is a clinical psychologist and researcher in health professions, education research. She has written about decolonial decolonization, marginalization, and voice in medical education, and is a fellow of the Karolinska Institute Prize for Research in Medical Education. She's been a visiting scholar at the Wilson Center for Research in Education, the University of Toronto, and the Global Health Humanities Unit at Duke University. So I'll hand you over to Dr. Terusha Naidu. Thanks, Terusha.
Thanks, Morgan. I must say I'm really disappointed that Prof. Sidat got cut off. Her talk sounded quite exciting. I was looking forward to it, but here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that? Somehow.
We can't see your screen.
But do you see the slides or do you see the slideshow? Okay, I'm just going to go from where we're at. So whilst
we put it on the slideshow, at the moment it's not showing a slideshow.
How's that?
Yeah, better.
Yeah, perfect. So looking at the profiles of perpetrators and I want to say survivors instead of victims of bullying, especially in the context of academic medicine and medical education context, because many people survive this very harsh kind of baptism of fire. And I think many of you that have become doctors would have experienced bullying in some form or another, or at least witnessed it, in which case vicarious bullying can be equally as traumatic as experiencing it yourself. So I want to just talk about how the culture of bullying develops insidiously during training in health and professions and medical education, in academia, and the context, opportunities, and climate that maintain this culture in medicine and medical education in general. During training, so a study as far back as 1998, and as Prof. Sidat says, bullying in medical education and medicine is probably as old as the profession himself. But going back around till 1998, a study in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that about 46% of students in one medical school had been abused during some point in time. And we know that percentages of reporting abuse and violence and personal violence is definitely an underreported kind of phenomenon. So there's also significant morbidity associated with medical students' abuse, and students who report mistreatment were more likely to experience depression, abuse of alcohol, low career satisfaction, and low opinion. Generally, all the other risk factors associated with bullying. So again, a lot of academic research has been done in different parts of the world. And a study about 14 years ago now looked at actual stories from the field, gathering narratives of students' experiences of gender discrimination specifically. And this aligns quite nicely with Prof. Sidat's experience and happens a lot in South Africa. So this study listened to stories of medical students and found that many of the bullying kind of incidents occurred around educational inequality, stereotypical comments, and these were comments around a person's race, gender, ethnic background, language groups, and definitely the sexual overtures, which tend to be the most overt kind of bullying, and probably I would say this goes even beyond just bullying. Bullying is probably would cover the less intrusive and harmful aspects. And when it comes to sexual overtures or even sexual harassment, I think this kind of falls into the ambit of criminal behavior. Also then, offensive or embarrassing or sexually explicit comments, like you heard in the video or the audio that Prof. Sidat played. And we've heard these and and even being victim of it ourselves. Just this week alone, I spoke to two registrars, actually one who was already a consultant, but related an incident where she observed a colleague being sexually harassed, with the senior doctor or consultant behaving as if it was something that the woman should have liked or found complimentary. So it wasn't just an intrusion on the part of the observer, but also obviously the victim herself. Inappropriate touching. And this kind of thing can be so nebulous, sort of a brush, touching a person's hair or commenting on their clothing. And then there were events that were not classifiable. So things that occur in these contexts that wouldn't necessarily be identified as bullying, but set up for bullying to occur. Innuendo, threats, making remarks of, well, maybe if you do this, this would happen, that kind of thing. So why does bullying occur in medical training? So some of the factors would be the culture of medical education. And if I have to go back to kind of what is being uncovered in decolonial theory and decolonial literature is that medicine is a highly heteropatriarchal culture. It is a culture that is based on heterosexual, male, dare I say, white points of view. And if you heard that video, you could make your own assumptions about why those dynamics were going on as well. Hidden in that is the demands of the hidden curriculum, what you need to do and what is the reality of that needs to be done in medical training, we know are two different things. So there are hidden demands that make bullying the context more pervasive, or bullying in the context more pervasive, such as a low tolerance for failure, high achievement is valued, and very little tolerance for failing or not making the grade. So I see a lot of many doctors and medical students and people from medical backgrounds in my practice as a psychologist, and the tolerance for failure in this environment is very low. So whilst you might not regard yourself as a failure in other environments, having a failure identity where you're not making the grade, you're not passing fast enough, well enough, you're not doing as well in practicals or in placements or in internships, can also create an insidious kind of bullying culture. And then also the transgenerational legacy. So the fact that medicine kind of transfers the culture of bullying throughout. So again, on the heteropatriarchal culture of medicine, this is an article from BMC from just last year, BMC Medical Education. And this is international because you can see that in Sydney, if you can't make it, you're not tough enough to do medicine. And we've heard this so many times in so many different forms. This is the discursive pattern, the underlying narrative, the melody. And the conclusion from this study is that mistreatment is continuing in clinical teaching and has negative consequences for mental health and learning. And structural changes is needed. So whilst I'm talking about the victim profile and the bully profile, this is actually not possible. These profiles would not exist without a culture that supports this kind of profile. Again, back to as far as 1998, this is Kassabaum, one of the earlier, more kind of well-known articles about the transgenerational legacy of bullying in medical training. And as far back as 1988, he was starting to recognize in literature that it's the culture of bullying, the structure. And we're learning more and more that the possibility for gender discrimination, racial discrimination is facilitated by structural factors. So the prototypes again, or the victim prototype and the bully prototype cannot exist outside of a structure that supports and encourages these profiles, this kind of people to exist. So transgenerational bullying. If we don't see it, we mimic behavior. We're primates, we mimic behavior, we recreate our social structures. If we don't see it, if there aren't underlying narratives that this is happening, we don't recreate it. So medicine and academia. So another study in BMJ Open, which is also quite recent, by a group of Greek and Italian, and looking at bullying in neonatal intensive care units. And just look at that context is scary enough. Imagine such a high kind of sensitivity context, and bullying is going around there as well. So that's another context that facilitates bullying. The more high risk the discipline in medicine, the higher the risk of bullying, because it can barking out instructions and being more decisive and using the context as being dangerous to facilitate a culture of bullying also happens. So for instance, almost creating a militaristic environment to facilitate or to perpetuate a bullying culture. Ironically, there are some articles that look at how military environments have unpacked bullying and advise that medical education environments should use this type of restructuring in the environment and training from the inside out to discourage bullying in that environment. Very much the same as how we've used lessons from airline and pilot training to get more precise in medical education. So the three main types of bullying that this study found was personal bullying, workplace bullying, and personal intimidation. And we can see from what we've experienced that this is pretty consistent with how bullying occurs in other cultures. When I mean cultures, I mean workplace cultures. So here's another study of a questionnaire survey, so both qualitative and quantitative studies. And this one concluded that stress and bullying are common in doctors undertaking research. So if you look at the transition from training to where we're talking about transitioning into being researchers in medicine, we see that the culture of transitioning between medicine as a practice and medicine as research also doesn't facilitate. So there is tacit hidden bullying, where as a clinician and a researcher, you have to traverse two different environments, but the structures themselves don't facilitate that change. So stress and bullying are common in doctors undertaking research. How many of you have been in a clinical environment having to make excuses or having to justify why you should be doing research, and then being in the research environment and justify why you have to do your clinical work? These are, so in that case, we might say the typical victim in bullying in that case would be a researcher or a medical person trying to do research in their field, but also trying to be in a clinical environment. It's not your typical idea of a victim of a bully, but I think many of us have been in that environment. And you can see how in that case, it's not being weak or being an incompetent person, but the structure that doesn't support this dual identity that can make a person a victim of being bullied. Then if we make the transition, and again, a structural mind, if you make a transition as an academic to trying to do your PhD, even if you already have an MD or a MD or a CHP, you can see how the structures also then victimize the person trying to make the change. So I've seen many medical professionals or other health professionals trying to get a PhD to transition into being an academic, and the academic environment just won't support them. And it's kind of a subtle harassment that has to go on. And why I'm highlighting these is these are the less obvious forms of victims of bullying. So what maintains bullying in academia? Professional jealousy, where, well, if you're working hard, I don't have to say much more about that, but if you're working hard, well, how do you do that? How do you, subtle questioning, jibes, that kind of thing. Also an attitude of selfishness. I can't progress if you progress. It's almost as if the pot is only this small, and it might be a resource constraint context in South Africa, and I'll talk more about that later. Also within the system, lack of rewards and acknowledgement, where you'll find that people are doing a lot, but no one recognizes it. And when people are trying to achieve, others wonder why. Whereas if there's external reward, less bullying is likely to occur. This will then create senses of isolation, low collaboration amongst colleagues. And this in itself can create a structural context in which bullying can occur, where kind of reverse bullying, where people are being bullied for trying to get ahead or trying to do more when the context doesn't support that. So bullying centers around power. It centers around kind of like energy. So power is the energy behind bullying. And where power shifts is where and how power shifts is how bullying happens. And the thing that we always seem to be most interested in, and all the cartoons and TV shows talk about it, is the personalities of bullying, as if the bully is able to create and be a bully in isolation, and the victim is a hapless victim outside of a context that facilitates and allows for the bullying. It's not like that. So bullies are made, not born, and bullies are shaped by the context. So here is where I talk about the profiles and the kinds of personality types that tend to be bullies, if you want to look at the stereotypical way of looking at it, is rigid personalities, and what we might consider people having antisocial, and this we mean aggressive, harsh kinds of people, narcissistic, self-centered, and then also erratic, disorganized, and inconsistent types tend to be the typical bullies. Also, people having personal and health issues, feeling overwhelmed, tend to be less compassionate, less accommodating. Also then aggressive, dominant, goal-directive environments that expect people who are successful to be aggressive and dominant, goal-directed, driven, and solution-focused, encourage and shape bullies within this heteropatriarchal and transgenerational legacy. So it's like we're set up to be bullies. Structural determinants then in academia. What are the contexts in which these bullies get shaped? Poor structures that don't support, macro structures of racism, sexism, sexual discrimination that then filter down into the work environment. Also, poor resources. There's high-level competition for funding, low academic support. It can encourage a bullying environment and create bullies where people were not, or cause people to create victims amongst their subordinates or staff. Poor leadership, people who are not fully invested, competing roles. Many of us have more roles than we need to. And this can create a lack of compassion for people who aren't able to judge. So judging people who are not able to take on more in a resource-constrained environment can create a bullying culture as well, and create bullies where they shouldn't be and victims where they shouldn't be. Also, unfair comparisons between disciplines, who works harder, who does this, can create bullying culture between disciplines. So why is this discipline not producing as much in terms of research? Why is this student not producing as much? So age and gender and historical privilege. And also institutionalization. I think in other contexts, it's called tenure and low accountability. The more secure and the less accountability there is, the more opportunity there is to create bullying. In a policy environment, poor reporting structures, poor communication, vague and unreliable reporting processes. Again, I'm going to go through these quickly because I'm running out of time. And then in-group discrimination as well, judging people unfairly by standards. So this is what I mean by in-group. It doesn't matter if you're not a professor out to university, but you can really feel you're a victim, or if you haven't achieved you haven't done your specialist training in the exact 4-year time. So creating a in culture of bullying with standards that don't mean much outside can create bullies and victims. And if we put this in context, we can see that by the time what we're achieving or what we're trying to achieve is really within a context that is created and artificial. And by the time, and if we have these external locuses of control, we can internalize the bully and start bullying ourselves. So we have these idealistic notions and then go into the system that is structured to create bullies. But then finally, if we look at this as well, whilst you might conform and want to conform and put yourself at risk for being bullied, eventually it's the rule breakers that really win the prizes. So whilst structures can create conformity, some kind of rebellion might be a good thing sometimes. I've added 2 other slides with some information, but I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Terusha. I think we're running a little bit late, so we will take questions for Terusha at the back end of the session. Let's get through all the speakers. In the meantime, please post your questions in Q&A, and they will be answered if necessary in the Q&A session. So we'll move back to Professor Sidat, who was just going into some very interesting concepts when she was untimely shut off by load shedding. So Terusha, if you wouldn't mind, just stop sharing.
Okay.
And allow Professor Sidat to take over.
Sorry.
Sorry about the load shedding, and Terusha has very nicely covered some of the components of my talk. So I'll go quite quickly through some of the aspects that I was going to cover. And as I said, I think it's really important that we define and scope the problem of workplace bullying, because the definition has really plagued our field for a long time. I'll highlight some of the drivers and risk factors and not overlap with what Terusha has said. She's also talked to the impact that it has on medical students and doctors, and I'll elaborate on that and highlight some of the data that has emerged globally, but also within the space of South African academic settings. And then lastly, just very quickly highlight what we could be doing to stop this very pervasive problem. And so speak to some of the prevention and mitigation strategies. So the American Medical Association, interestingly, defines workplace bullying as stated up here, but the AMA definition does not refer to sexual harassment in its definition of bullying. But often when we think about bullying in academic spaces, we include harassment and sexual harassment in particular in that definition. And many university policies still don't include, the emerging forms of bullying that haven't been as well studied in tertiary academic settings, such as cyberbullying. So as Terusha has highlighted, bullying constitutes a range of behaviors, and often these behaviors are very subtle or they're very nuanced. And bullying typically is repetitive. It is repetitive behavior, and it, while covers a range of behaviors, as I've mentioned, it almost inevitably in the kind of medical setting results in threats to professional status. It is often in the form of exclusion and isolation of colleagues or students in the setting of overwork. It's also highly gendered in academic settings. So, males and females may experience different types of bullying, but females have consistently been shown to be at higher risk. And perpetrators, as Terusha has mentioned, are often motivated, and especially kind of more senior academics, senior specialists, motivated by desire to improve performance in junior colleagues. But, I have said previously in a talk, and it has caused some consternation, that the intention is irrelevant. And by that, I mean that obviously the intention does matter, but bullying is bullying, and it needs to be called out. And so whether the perpetrator is bullying the recipient on the basis of trying to motivate performance, that is really immaterial. So perpetrators, are consultants, medical officers, other academics, medical students are often the recipients of bullying, so too are registrars, and then, other healthcare workers. And Terusha has mentioned this transgenerational legacy, which, is really pervasive and, has really perpetuated the problem of bullying over time. So medicine, is characterized by a kind of confrontational nature of teaching. It's sort of challenging the knowledge and learning capabilities of students and registrars. And as Terusha has mentioned, this culture actually becomes part of the hidden curriculum in medical education, and it seriously kind of hampers interpersonal communication, ultimately impacts on patient care. And if we think about, the various factors or drivers that give rise to bullying, we can think about them as individual level factors, organizational factors, and then health system factors. Now, what has been consistently shown is that there are certain medical specialties that are particularly high risk. These include emergency medicine, obstetrics and gynecology, and then, the wide range of surgical disciplines. These tend to be disciplines that, are associated with long hours of work, often characterized by doctors and medical students being subjected to sleep deprivation. It's also been shown that, in specialties where there is poor or less clinical supervision, bullying tends to occur more frequently. So the question is, how common is it? It's been around for that long. How common is it? Is the prevalence decreasing? Is it increasing? Or is it pretty much staying the same? Well, bullying was first documented in medical settings way back in 1990. And the landmark study is that of a pediatrician, Dr. Henry Silver. And he first documented the rampant problem of bullying at the medical school that he was working at. And what he said in his paper that was published in JAMA at the time was that 46% of students at that medical school had at some point experienced harassment. He says that students went from being alert, enthusiastic, and excited to being cynical, dejected, frightened, or depressed and filled with frustration over the course of their medical training. So while in first years, 46% of students reported or endorsed some form of bullying, by the end of medical training, so at the end of medical school, that number had actually approached 80%. Now, since that time, so in the past 40 years, there have been many, many studies globally that have documented bullying and harassment among medical students and doctors. And despite us having, I think, invested much as medical educators and researchers in qualifying and quantifying the problem, attempts to address it appropriately have actually not matched the flurry of research that has occurred. So despite increased awareness of the problem, attempts at ameliorating it have not been very successful, and this is particularly concerning. So it must be said that prevalence rates also differ depending on the definition used. And I want to say again that, varying definitions of bullying have really kind of plagued the field because, we all kind of may understand bullying differently. And this is kind of true from all of the studies that have been published. If you consider medical students around the world, most studies kind of report wide-ranging prevalences of 10% to up to 98%. So what about in South Africa? Well, There was a recent study published actually in the April issue of the South African Medical Journal, conducted among academics at a Faculty of Health Sciences in the country, reporting that more than half of academics at that faculty had experienced abusive behaviors in the workplace. And being female and being a joint appointee actually doubled the risk of bullying. So once again, I just want to highlight this kind of gendered situation that we have when it comes to bullying and harassment, that women tend to be at much higher risk. Now, a meta-analysis of registrars or studies of registrars across multiple medical disciplines found that the pooled prevalence was about 60%. So once again, more than half. And verbal harassment was the commonest form of abuse. Consultants were the most frequent perpetrators, and female trainees and those of ethnic minorities, again, were at highest risk. So we conducted a study several years back among medical students at our faculty. And it was an online survey, including students from 2nd to 6th year. And we asked them about experiences of mistreatment by senior doctors, but also by other healthcare workers during their training. And as can be seen on the graph on the left-hand side, that many reported experiences of bullying. Those mostly included, being ignored, being excluded from activities, inappropriate gestures, experiencing verbal abuse, but also high rates of racial and gender discrimination. One of the areas that has been far less studied is cyberbullying. I mention this because there has been a lot of attention paid to cyberbullying among youth, but relatively little attention to cyberbullying, at medical institutions and in tertiary settings in general. So the use of ICT, in academic settings actually serves to disrupt the typical power hierarchies that we see in bullying, because it provides the option of anonymity. So a perpetrator can obviously bully online and be anonymous, and it also allows for indirect forms of bullying. So there have been few studies, and I highlight, one of the very few studies, and this was a study that was conducted in Canada among faculty and teaching instructors, and also found high rates of cyber harassment, both from colleagues, but also from students. And the faculty who were surveyed and who had experienced bullying reported multiple difficulties extending from physical to mental health problems, and also impact on work performance. Now, interestingly, over 2/3 of those who had experienced bullying had tried to do something to stop the cyber harassment, but less than half was successful in doing so. And I think this is, the situation that we all face in our settings, that students and staff often don't know who to turn to. They don't know about reporting procedures. And then when bullying is reported, often very little is done about the problem. And then in that survey, and this is also, I think, a kind of mirror situation that we have here, is that many universities may have policies, but those policies are not necessarily clear, effective, and widely enforced. So just to get back to the study that we did among medical students, just to highlight, the mental health impact. So 1 in 4 students were assessed to have a probable mood or anxiety disorder in that survey. And 3 out of 4 students who had been mistreated felt that the mistreatment that they experienced within the academic workspace had actually contributed to their mood or anxiety problems. And I highlight here, some of the feedback that we got from students So students sort of said that often they were laughed at. This was done in a group setting. They were threatened with failure of the rotation. There was blatant discrimination, reports of white students being favored in theatre and males receiving preferential treatment. And a particular comment from a senior doctor highlights the sexist attitudes reported. And so this was a senior doctor who had said to this particular student, why are there so many women in the operating room? You would swear it's a nursing school, to which the other doctors also laughed. So, as I've said, the effects of bullying are far-reaching and should not be underestimated. So lastly, what could we be doing to stop it? Well, because the drivers of bullying, occur at individual, organizational, and health system levels, it's really important that prevention and mitigation strategies actually target the individual, organizational, and systemic factors that perpetuate bullying. And firstly, it is really important. These are, as you will see, very simple strategies, but they are hard to implement. And the first step is really education and raising awareness. And that means educating staff at all levels. I mean, it also requires a cultural shift, which is particularly difficult. So it's improving, the organizational culture within which we work, especially, in the kind of medical hierarchical system that that kind of plagues our field. So it's clearly defining what it is, and so every kind of university policy has to really spell out in detail what bullying actually is. It has to include all of the examples of bullying, including cyberbullying. So I know at my institution, the policy for kind of harassment and sexual discrimination was recently revised. It's actually in the process of being revised, and cyberbullying has been elaborated on in the revised policy. It's also really important that students and staff are told that it is essential that when bullying occurs, it needs to be called out. The policies and processes that need to be in place, have to be very clear for not just reporting bullying, but also, providing sufficient information to students and staff about what will happen when an incident of bullying is reported. And then, responsiveness and the kind of the timeliness of response is also really important. So there needs to be immediate intervention with enforcement of kind of clearly outlined consequences for perpetrators within academic settings. And then, when it comes to kind of the cultural shift and improving the organizational environment in which we work, I think, it really boils down to kind of very simple principles of fostering respect and ensuring that colleagues as well as kind of students, so junior students and staff are appreciated. And it's, creating a safe environment as well as safe spaces in which students and staff can discuss experiences that they may directly experience or that they may know about. They may either witness or they may know about that other students and colleagues or staff experience. So thank you very much. And maybe just to end off by saying that, I think that this, holds particularly true when it comes to bullying and discrimination in workplaces, and that is that knowing what's right doesn't mean much unless you do what's right. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Sidat. I think what we'll do is we'll take questions at the end because we're running a bit behind time. So I'll just hand over to my co-moderator, Professor Ramlal, to introduce the next three speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Naidu. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to this panel our next speaker, who's Ms. Busi Ramabodu, who is the Director of Human Resources Development as well as a psychologist. And her life's mission is to contribute positively to people finding meaning at work, resolving conflict, work-life integration and well-being, and developing organizational effectiveness initiatives that put people at the core. A facilitator and a mental health professional, she has a long history of providing counseling, psychotherapy, psychoeducation, and training in various settings. She's passionate about driving the agenda of transforming the academy and women in leadership and in academia through the Imbokodu, which is Women in Leadership, which she chairs. She's also the founder of a group called PsychReach, where psychologists provide practical outreach to needy learners. Busi, welcome, and we hand over to you now. Busi, are you with us? I know you were with us earlier, but our attendees can just bear with us. There are issues with load shedding at various sites across the country. Busi, are you here with us?
Busi, please unmute.
Busi, we can't hear you. Marianne, I'm not sure. I can't see Busi on the call. Can you just confirm if she is with us?
We've just lost her. So I think we should move on to the next speaker.
The next speaker. So once again, apologies for that. It now gives me pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Flavia Cinco-Bogue, and she is the president of the Colleges of Medicine South Africa and the chair of the WHO Afro-Region African Advisory Council on Research. Just lost my page, sorry, just bear with me. Which is concerned with advising the WHO Afro-Regional Director on matters concerning health research and development in Africa. She is a public health medicine specialist and head of the Health Policy and Management Division at the University of Pretoria. She is also the president of Women in Global Health, South Africa, and vice president of the African Federation of Public Health Association. Dr. Flavia Cinco-Bogue, welcome, and we hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramlal. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Flavia.
Okay. Thank you so much to my dear sister, Professor Suvira Ramlal, and I'll be remiss even in her absence to my other dear sister, Professor Dloba. I really want to say and recognize the fact that UKZN is one of the first institutions, in fact, to hold this particular webinar. And I really want to congratulate Professor Dloba for her leadership in starting this conversation. And I really hope that most of our universities are watching and listening in. And I want to say as well how humbled I am to be part of this distinguished panel of dear sisters and friends and many people who I know in the medical corridors. Mine really, colleagues, is all of 5 minutes that I have been given. And really is the question that I was asked to answer is how the colleges of medicine contributing to this discourse around bullying in the academic sector. And so I think it was really to look at a lens of an organization that is well known in our country and also an organization that, that really is important in terms of our medical landscape. And so colleagues, the first thing before I even start is to say, my colleagues, both Professor Sidat and Dr. Naidu have said it beautifully. And they have talked about the heteropatriarchal culture. You cannot do anything in an organization unless you dismantle the culture. And so the first thing in the colleges of medicine that we have done is really to adopt a new philosophy. And in that adopting a new philosophy, it is in creating a new architecture. And the reason why we've done that is because we recognize, we can't run away from the recognition of the fact that there is need to have change. And so at the colleges of medicine, the first thing before even drafting policies, it was definitely about dismantling the culture and then adopting a new culture. And the new culture that we have adopted is Ubuntu, I am because we are. And we have adopted this because we have a recognition of the fact that my registrar or my candidate is who I am, and I am because they are. And once we recognize that, we start recognizing that Jack is somebody's child, is somebody's husband, is somebody's son. Mary is somebody's daughter. Olani, Nomsa, every single person matters. Their voice matters, and their humanity also matters. And so from that adoption of the new culture and our new philosophy, we have then gone on, and when we started in our triennium, is to go on what we called listening tours. And when I speak to medical leaders, I always say to them, this is something that you certainly have got to adopt as you, especially when you're newly elected. In fact, even if you've been there for a while. And I'll tell you why the listening tours were important. We went across the country listening to both our professors, the consultants, every single teacher and every single person, and also our students, the registrars. And the reason why we did that is to get a mandate. What is it that people want, and what is their shape? What kind of shape and form do they think the college should be? And after the listening tours, we got a number of things which we have implemented. One is around, we have what we call a candidates policy, and the candidates policies spells out quite clearly around the issues of you will treat, you will be treated with respect, we do not discriminate, and all these things that we have been talking about this evening. We also then have an examiner policy, which we traditionally did not have. And the examiner policy talks about fairness, confidentiality, respect towards your fellow colleagues and also towards the students. It is important to have these particular two policies because one, it starts to recognize the voice of both the candidate and also the lecturers themselves. And then the other one that we have done is around putting together what we're calling a whistleblower platform. We have a whistleblower policy, but there's also a platform whereby our candidates can go and they can say, they can do a complaint, whistleblower, and say, this is what happened to me. And with that particular whistleblower platform is chaired by an independent person who has got nothing to do, with the examination, nor with the candidates. And we feel that has really helped us in terms of improving our practice and looking in and having this mirror. And I think I want to just say that there are also a number of things that we've done. For instance, some of these things, we call them very salient, but they're very important in each and every single one of our meetings, even from ourselves, as the colleagues have said this whole evening, that it starts with us. We are the people who are the bullies. The students bully the lecturers bully the students. And so in essence, when we are talking to ourselves, and so the first thing is that even just in our meetings, we say at the colleges of medicine, we will treat each other with fairness, with kindness, with compassion. We do understand that we'll have these robust engagements, but they have to be done in a space that is safe and that is fair and that is kind. And I must say, in our meetings, we don't have those acrimonious meetings where people are screaming and shouting at each other, precisely because what is demanded of them is that kindness, that fairness, and that compassion. And that has gone a very long way. I mean, maybe I can just share and say, one of my colleagues was saying to me that because of what they've learned in the college, they're now implementing it in their own department, because they didn't know that, in fact, you could have a meeting which is compassionate, where you can listen to the voice of your registrars and the voice of your colleagues, you know, without feeling that you have to defend a position. And I want to lastly just end off by saying, transparency is key. And in terms of being transparent, you have to know that the voice of the candidates, I keep on talking about this voice, and it's a voice, but it's also the humanity and recognizing of the humanity of all of us. And the first thing is to say, is to ask yourself, how am I bullying? You know, it's never just about an outwardness or a bigness of this institution that is bullying me or colleagues bullying me. Ask yourself, is it in the tone that I'm speaking to colleagues? Is it in, you know, not standing up for a colleague who is being laughed at or who is being bullied? And some of these things are the things we've done with the college, particularly with the staff members, to ask them, you know, how are you bullying other people and how can you change? And once you recognize that it's not, we don't do it in a punitive environment, we say there is a better way of you doing things. And then also the other thing is about how are you dismantling these norms that are there. For instance, the issues around the hidden curriculum and this notion of the low tolerance of failure that we have. How will we, for instance, when we give marks to our candidates, we make ourselves available in terms of speaking to a candidate who hasn't done well, because that is not the end of the world. And in essence, we need to recognize that it may have just been a bad day for them. It may have just been that they just need an extra 6 months. And so in essence, failure is not the end of it. And it's really is not something that should identify that person for the rest of their lives as somebody who hasn't done well. And so some of these things that we call salient are critically important. And as I end off, I want to say that I attended a conference, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, and the speaker ended off by saying that we have to normalize planting trees under whose shade we're not going to rest. And this is the culture of the college in terms of our new philosophy and our culture. It is precisely a recognition of our candidates, our registrars, and our consultants as well, are key and important people. And we've coined this phrase of the people's college. And so they have to feel like they're a part of this huge family without any expectation of return of anything else. And so if we normalize as leaders planting these trees under whose shade we are not going to rest, we ensure that when our candidates leave, as I always say loosely, they have to be recognized by their grandmother. And with that, I'm saying, as much as we need a technically competent public health medicine specialist or pediatrician or psychiatrist, it is important that the Cinco-Bogues or the Kumalos or the Ramlals still recognize their daughters as who they are, the shining example, the laughing people who now has become a pediatrician. Thank you so much, Prof. Ramla.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cinco-Bogue. It's really, thank you for that very refreshing talk, and rather the refreshing approach that the CMSA has. And I think that really holds out hope for our universities. And I think there's a lot of lessons and leaves that universities can take out of the CMSA's approach to this chronic but unaddressed problem. And thank you also for your inspiring leadership. I think we have Busi back on, and welcome again, Busi. You may go ahead.
Thank you so much, Suvia. I think technology is playing tricks on us this evening. And let me start by greeting the colleagues and the members that have joined us this evening. My task this evening is very simple. I've been asked to briefly talk about the university's processes on academic bullying or workplace bullying. So I'd like to share my slides. Start sharing first. So So a lot of what the colleagues have spoken about kind of resonate with what we've seen with regards to bullying at UKZN. So I'm not going to go into all of those details, but one of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight before I go into the policies is what we call the bystander effect. And why the bystander effect is important is because it's one of the things that kind of make us all succumb to kind of creating this culture of bullying. And, you know, that's the kind of phenomena where basically it says that, you know, when observers are looking at an incident that is inappropriate, people generally don't want to be the first ones to do something about it unless other people act. You know, it's based on an experiment that's very old, which was done in 1968. And you can see it in a number of ways. And I just wanted to talk about some of the reasons that make us all succumb to this bystander effect. And of course, as I've indicated, it also contributes to us or the lack of efficiency in dealing and addressing this culture of bullying. So you would find that people generally would say that it happened to me. So in other words, because it happened to me, we've kind of normalized inappropriate behavior. So, because generally that's what happens. It's similar to what happens in boys' high schools with initiation, where we kind of accept something because it has always happened that way. And some people say students these days are weak. So in other words, when students are not able to tolerate inappropriate behavior, then they are deemed to be weak. Some people say that no one seems to be doing anything about it. So which means I'm also going to keep quiet. And as a result, they also don't do anything about it. And of course, other people keep quiet because of fear of personal consequences for aligning with the victim. As we know that where there's a culture of bullying, there's likely to be consequences generally for the people, for the survivors, as well as for the people that are seen to be on the side of the victim. So hence it becomes difficult to kind of report and implement. So why this was important is because we can have all the policies in place, but the efficiency and effectiveness of those policies depend on all of us. It depends on us who have experienced these incidences to report them so that something can be done about them. It also depends on us who are sitting on the sidelines and are watching to also call it out for what it is. So it ultimately, as the previous speaker has already said, the responsibility is really in all of us to keep and change the type of culture that we want to see in academia. So I thought this was important to highlight because it makes us all really question ourselves. Am I watching something that I should not be watching? Or should I be doing something about what the kind of pattern of behavior that I'm seeing being perpetrated against my colleague or against a student? Some people say it's not bullying, it's academic freedom. So there's a lot of studies that have also been done where you know, people use academic freedom to justify inappropriate behavior or to justify bullying. So again, we have to question what exactly is academic freedom and how is it different from bullying. Of course, because of time, we're not going to go into details of all of that. Then at UKZN, we have a number of frameworks that we've put in place to kind of direct and guide the type of behavior that we want to see. And of course, as I indicated, the efficiency and effectiveness of all these instruments that we've put in place depend on all of us for the culture to change. The first one is the REACH-T values. Many of you who are colleagues at UKZN are familiar with these values, but often what we see is that instead of looking at myself and whether I am living the values, most people want to look at other people and say, but you are not living the values. And most of the time we fail to look at ourselves. And generally, when we look at values and the values that we want to see in an organization, is instead of asking and pointing at other people, we need to look at ourselves. You know, if all of of us looked at ourselves, then we would see the type of behaviors that we want to see and the kind of culture that we want to see. So we need to do both. And then the next one is the, this thing is sticky. We have the staff-student relationship policy, which governs the way in which academics are meant to engage with students and deals with issues of conflict of interest. But then again, it depends on whether students report these incidences. And later on, I'm going to talk about how students or anyone really can go about reporting. So this framework also outlines the type of behavior that we want to see at UKZN and how to deal with conflict of interest. Because generally bullying often arises where there's an imbalance of power between the parties involved. And then the next one is the disciplinary code. Many universities, organizations have some sort of a disciplinary and grievance procedure, which outlines what happens when someone has behaved inappropriately. One of the key things that the disciplinary codes indicates is that bullying is a very serious offense. So meaning that the consequence of it is either a final written warning or a dismissal. And of course, once the matter is reported to HR, HR will evaluate the seriousness of the offense and follow the correct procedure. With many of these things, because we're dealing with human beings, we always have to abide by the ad alteram partem rule, which basically says hear the other side. So our process also follows that type of principle, because sometimes we have had cases where, you know, some people are falsely accused of these things. So it outlines the process that needs to be followed in terms of counseling, ADR, or even a discipline or a grievance process. And then other policies that we have, as we've heard from many of the speakers that have spoken so far, that sometimes bullying can be racially motivated, either overtly or covertly so. So again, the university also has a race and racism policy, which governs how we should deal with issues of race and racial discrimination. It says clearly that we do not tolerate any racism or any racial discrimination. And of course, there are processes for reporting such. And then, of course, the sexual harassment policy again is also there, and it outlines and it explains exactly what sexual harassment is and so on. However, of course, as my colleagues has indicated, that some of these policies were written before, you know, issues of cyberbullying and so on. So we are also in the process of reviewing some of our policies in line with some of the recent forms of bullying that we see. And then we've also have the gender-based violence policy, which is also meant to help prevent incidents of GBV. So obviously, sexual harassment policy and GBV are related. In terms of the processes for reporting, we've got a communication protocol in the university. So the circle that you see in red there outlines the process, because when bullying has happened, it becomes an employee relationship matter. It becomes about our relationship with the perpetrator as an employer. So the matter needs to be reported to the line manager or escalated to the dean and head of school. If the line manager doesn't do anything about it, escalated to the DVC and head of college. If the people below have not done anything, escalated to the vice chancellor if all of the people below have also not done anything. Of course, in the process, HR needs to also be reported to in terms of the incidents, because we need to guide the process that needs to be followed depending on the type of incident. And of course, this protocol applies to both students and staff. They can follow the same process. And then in terms of some of the things that we've put in place to create awareness, in 2020, we realized as HR that it seemed like workplace bullying was quite rife in the institution. So because we were working virtually, we decided to launch an online workplace bullying campaign. Many of you who are UKZN colleagues may have seen that campaign. However, when COVID-19 came on board, the campaign was overtaken by COVID-19, hence you no longer see it on the screen. So there we made it clear what bullying is, examples of what bullying can be, and the fact that we all need to look at ourselves and whether we ourselves are bullies and so on. In order to deal with issues of diversity and inclusion, as indicated earlier on, that sometimes bullying can be gender-based or it can be racially based. We facilitated workshops on sustainable diversity and inclusion, where really we encourage our employees to challenge their unconscious bias. What are those assumptions that you make about people that are different from you, that you make without being aware of? And we've also run a gender-based violence campaign and training, which is currently continuing. We're currently focusing on training our first-line staff that deal with gender-based violence. At the moment, we're focusing on staff that is based in the residences and staff that is based in RMS, because RMS also becomes the first line of reporting specifically for gender-based violence. We've also incorporated the gender-based violence policy and the sexual harassment policy in our new employee onboarding. So all new employees from last year have been, we've created awareness, we create our awareness on a continuous basis as employees join on these two policies and what the university stance is on them. We are also in the process of reviewing our GPV strategy and response. As the university, we started in 2020, we've procured the services of an external provider to help us review, because we realized, as many people indicated, that sometimes you can have policies, but those policies can become inefficient if the procedures for reporting are not clear, or if the activities that follow after the reporting also are not satisfactory. It can also become a deterrent for people reporting any forms of bullying or any forms of GBV. So we're in the process of reviewing that to identify the gaps and formulate an appropriate GBV strategy and action plan. In terms of the support that is available, when a student or a staff member has reported bullying, there is support that is provided by student services in terms of trauma debriefing and counseling. And for employees, we have the UKZN ICAS for employees, where again trauma debriefing and counseling can be supported, can be provided, because we know that sometimes reporting workplace bullying can be quite an emotionally taxing thing in itself. So as a result, the support that is provided to the survivor or the victim is quite critical to ensure that ultimately everyone that is watching can see that the consequences of having engaged in such behavior. So, Chair, thank you. I think with the time that I've been given, sort of rushed through, but that's the UKZN approach to workplace bullying. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Busi. And to our attendees, we do apologize, and we do appreciate that it's really insufficient time for speakers to do justice to the topic, but we are just opening up this dialogue and giving you a range of perspectives from different people, from different sectors, from the academic and clinical sector and university sectors. So please bear with us. This conversation will grow across several seminars. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome on board Prof. Ratamane, and he is a psychiatrist, currently the chairperson of the Medical and Dental Board of the Health Professionals Council of South Africa. He was the head of Department of Psychiatry for 20 years at several universities, and he's been an active member of the College of Medicine of South Africa, as well as the South African Society of Psychiatrists over many years. As you can see, many psychiatrists on this platform today. Welcome, Prof. Ratamane.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ramla. I sent a few slides to Professor Glover to put them up for me. I hope
Glover had load shedding issues, so I'm not sure whether she was able to forward them. Prof. Glover, you are with us. Would you be able to share those slides?
Yes, I have the slides with me, so I'm going to screen share, but I must warn you that I keep losing internet connectivity. So if I drop out, please continue with your.
Yes, but in the interest of time, perhaps I should start. by thanking Professor Dlover and the team at UKZN for leading us with these seminars on academic bullying. When she invited me to share a few thoughts on this aspect, I realized that the HPCSA does not have a clear perspective on specifically academic bullying. However, they have dealt with cases referred to for mediation, for preliminary inquiry, which are close to what one would call academic bullying. So we have tried to initiate a process through Medical Education and Training Committee to look at whether we can actually develop guidelines to manage academic bullying. I think we have to accept that HPCSA is a regulator, and sometimes these things may not necessarily come to the HPCSA, but they're within the purview of university rules, regulations, and so on. For instance, all the things that Busi mentioned there. And I must say also that the College of Medicine on the website does guide us in terms of how the trainers should interact with the trainees. But I don't think many people read the website or the CMSA. So the referrals that are close to this subject at preliminary inquiry of the HPCSA would include a practitioner, a teacher being referred because he refused to provide academic support or supervision. This is the case where a candidate goes to make appointments, they're canceled and does not get reasons why the appointments are canceled. Refusal to guide in the choice of research topic. Again, the candidate would have repeatedly asked for support in terms of choosing the topic and finds that other people have been guided, supported, and even given references for their research projects. So at times, the candidate is not even given an appointment at all, and there's no reason given. The secretary just told, I'm not available. One of the things that the CMSA, for instance, talks about or has guided us not to do is to call trainees dumb, stupid, or harass them in many ways, particularly if it's in public, in front of their colleagues, or in front of other people. Now, this happens very often in ward rounds, in teaching meetings, when a candidate or student does not know the answer. The trainers have to be trained to control their emotions. The next point is deliberately undermarking students because they do not do things outside their scope of work. The student's scope of work really is primarily to learn and to do practical work by seeing patients and so on as part of their training. But you don't ask the student to make tea for you. You don't send the student to the shop unless the relationship between you and the student is such that those things are possible, or ask the student to do things that are really not in line with the academic work. The issue of sexual harassment has been mentioned. Overt requests for sexual favors or behavior suggestive of sexual advances comes up very, very often. That is dealt with in preliminary inquiry at the HPCSA. The video that Professor Sidat opened with, it's a very important one because at the preliminary inquiry committee that I chaired, we interviewed Yumna Musa, and we interviewed all the people who were allegedly bullying her. But I cannot give you the report here because that's confidential unless Yumna wants to release it. She had posted recording, which she did privately, of the interview by the committee. The dynamics are very interesting. The last point I want to mention here that has come to us for dealing with, it's a scolding of a student, or I've already mentioned it, in front of other people or colleagues, instead of calling that student to a private meeting. I think this is essential. Some students are very anxious, some are very sensitive, and some have their own self-evaluation, and they also have their own way of evaluating the trainer. And they don't want to be talked to in a particular manner in public. Next slide. Yeah, before I go into this slide, the previous slide also indicates that we do need, as we get into this area, to do a bit more research into the personality of the bully and also the personality of the person being bullied. For instance, is this person being bullied everywhere? Or did it happen only at UKZN? Or when this person moved to Medunsa or Limpopo, where trainers also being accused of bullying? I think this is important because, and this is where hearing the other party is very, very important. So the HPCSA's approach is very important in analyzing the behavior as whether it would be classified as bullying or interfering with the progress or development of the trainee. We look at whether this behavior is intimidating to the trainee. For instance, there are teachers who threaten, candidates with violence openly. I'll beat you up, I'll mess you up. Now those phrases, even if he's not going to do that, but if you mention or you say that phrase, you utter that phrase, you are already intimidating the trainee. These behaviors, are they adversely affecting the trainee's attitude to the course taken? Yes. You may find a trainee suddenly changing to go and study something else because he or she is uncomfortable in the course that he's busy with because of the attitude of the supervisor. It is stigmatizing. Is it stigmatizing the trainee as an incapable person? Yes, particularly if you are mentioning these things in the presence of other people. You are stupid, you should not be here. You should not have enrolled for psychiatry or surgery or whatever course it may be. You should be elsewhere. You are good for gardening, not here. Those are very, very, terrible statements to make in a training session. Does it retard the progress of the trainee or prolong training time without explanation? In many cases, it's been found that it really does, because the attitude of the trainee changes, does not study with enthusiasm, does not approach the course with enthusiasm. Usually, if internal institute intervention did not work, this is when the matters are referred to the HPCSA. The matter may also have legal implications. For instance, in the case of sexual harassment or in the case of actual physical violence, this is not happening these days easily, but in the recent past, there were situations where the trainer or supervisor slapped, a trainee. Now that is very obvious. What's key here is that many institutions protect their teachers or their trainers. If the matter goes to the dean's office or the vice chancellor's office, they try to talk to them separately. It doesn't work. It's very, very important to have a meeting where both parties can say their story and you have very objective, independent assessors to determine whether this was problematic behavior or not. Next slide. Let's move to the next slide. So in this final slide, I just want to mention the interventions of the HPCSA in passing. The first one is mediation. The HPCSA has the HPCSA ombudsman who would then invite the parties for mediation to discuss the matter. And sometimes the solution will be found. In this case, we hope that the trainers, the trainer would not be, affected by the environment in which he's training, and that there'll be a reasonable, training environment for both the trainer and the trainee. This mediation may include written or verbal apologies, depending on the direction that the mediation takes. So the process, as I've said, is overseen by the HPCSA ombudsman. Normally, the mediation process does not count against the practitioner as a case against him that is recorded. And it does also count against the student or the trainee. And I'm saying this in the sense that sometimes during mediation, you'll find that in fact, the trainer was not in the wrong. The person who has persistently pestered the trainer is the student. So we have to take that into consideration, that sometimes it's a dual process. Now, when mediation has failed, or when the student or the complainant is unhappy, these matters are referred to preliminary inquiry committees, and the defendant, particularly the defendant, refuses to come for mediation. This is now seen as a severe matter. The committee will sit and they will write a letter to the defendant asking him or her to state what happened. They'll show him what the complaint is. And if the committee is not satisfied with the response given in writing, they call the defendant for a consultation. Now, if a preliminary inquiry does not help at all, this becomes an even more severe matter that goes to what you call conduct inquiry. Both the defendant, the complainant are then represented by lawyers. We haven't had such a matter in the case of bullying that goes that far. These matters, few of them have been resolved through mediation and also by intervention of the committees of preliminary inquiry. But let me stop here and thank UKZN, Prof. Glover and the team again for initiating this process. We will share with you in about 3 months the criteria guidelines that HPCSA will have drafted, and most probably ask for comments as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very informative. We're going to move on now to the talk by Prof. Martin Sain. He completed his undergrad training here at the University of Natal, and then trained as a cardiothoracic surgeon in Durban. And when he finished his fellowship in 1992, he then went on to do his transport training in the UK, and then worked at a medical laboratory at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. He's the examiner for the College of Medicine of South Africa. He's the HOD of cardiothoracic surgery here at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Apart from his very extensive research credentials, he takes a special interest in registrar training, and he's going to talk to us about how to be a good mentor. Thanks, Raj.
Thanks, Len. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to talking about what makes a good mentor. There are several points that I'd like to highlight. The first one is a willingness to share knowledge and expertise. And the important thing is, as a mentor, you're at a different level compared to the mentee, and to express and share that knowledge such that the mentee understands. There's no point in doing it at your level, and if he doesn't understand what you're telling him, he's not going to acquire that knowledge. And there must be a willingness to share everything, because your mentee should learn from your mistakes. He shouldn't be making the same mistakes. The second attitude, the second quality is that one needs to demonstrate a positive attitude. Because in mentoring somebody, that mentee needs to look up to you and say, hey, one day I'd like to be like my mentor. And if you have a positive attitude towards what you do, your discipline, this will naturally be acquired by your mentee. The third point I'd like to highlight is one needs to take a personal interest in mentoring. It's quite a big responsibility. It cannot be taken lightly. And at the end of the day, your trainee is a reflection on you. And the quality of the training is a reflection on you. Because when he goes out or she goes out into the big wide world, it reflects on yourself as well as your institution. Sorry, I should have gone to the next slide. The fourth point is one needs to be enthusiastic about what one is doing. And this, if you don't enjoy your job, if you don't look forward to your job, this will naturally be picked up by your mentee. And how can one expect somebody to take up a discipline where the mentor is not really enthusiastic and likes what he's doing? The next point is ongoing learning and growth. One learns all the time. And the thing is, a mentor must be able to continue learning, continue growing, and in growing, this is transferred onto the mentee such that he realizes that knowledge is infinite. In order for one to achieve the heights, one needs to go on imbibing knowledge. One must remember that the mentor is at a different level compared to the mentee. And it's important that when a mentee makes a mistake, there must be guidance, there must be constructive feedback such that the mentee learns from it. He mustn't be demoralized and say, no, this is not for him or her. It's important that you need to create that environment such that he can never be at the same level starting in a discipline or particular job. But in order for him to achieve the heights, he needs guidance. He will make mistakes, she will make mistakes, but they need to be guided such that they do not make the mistakes recurrently. They learn not only from their mistakes, but from your mistakes, so they don't make the same mistakes. The next point is respect. The mentor must be respected, and how the mentor behaves towards colleagues, students, superiors is picked up by the mentee. And in order for the mentee to acquire the same skill set, he will watch the mentor, observe the mentor, and if the mentor behaves disrespectfully, the message or the impression is created that it's okay to be disrespectful. Personal and professional goals. I think it's important for a mentor to set himself goals and work towards those goals, because learning is an ongoing process. Just as the mentee, has personal and professional goals, the mentor also needs to have these goals such that it's such that they both see that in order to achieve a particular level of competence, both the mentor and the mentee needs to strive towards their goals. The next point is values, valuing other people's opinions and views. And this is particularly important if they in conflict or with your views. It's important to realize there's various ways of doing things. A lot of things may be done differently that you may not agree with, but disagree on a professionally, as Flavia had said, is that you do it being respectful, polite, and not hurling of chairs or abuse because somebody else has a different view to yours. And at the end of the day, it's important that you set a good example. And, putting it simplistically, I mean, your mentee needs to have the mindset that, hey, one day I would like to be like the mentor. And that's the only way that is going to happen, is if you set a good example. In conclusion, I'd like to say that, we're in a teaching environment, and one needs to create, it's important the mentor creates a nurturing environment that is conducive to teaching and learning, such that the mentee doesn't feel intimidated or inadequate. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot, Raj. It was excellent. And I know you are exceptional at this. So we appreciate your input on that. Unfortunately, we've gone a little bit over time already. I see we have 2 hands raised. Is it okay if we just quick, I see one of them is Dr. Charlie. Can we quickly, unfortunately, we'll have to be brief. I think if we can just give Dr. Charlie a quick chance there, please, Marianne.
Okay, she's unmuted.
Dr. Charlie.
My humble apologies. I think I pressed my hand, got it by mistake. I was listening intently to what Dr. Martinson was saying and didn't intend to raise my hand. But thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the invite.
All right. I think most of the questions have now been answered in the Q&A, and really we've gone a little bit over time, and I've got some thank yous to do. So if I may, I think there's been a lot of questions on how do we get this done, and I think the one slide by Prof. Sidat was probably the one I'm going to remember most. You know, just to define it. Everybody needs to know what it is, to call it out. You know, and then to get the policies and procedures in place. And I think, you know, it's been said by almost all the panelists. You know, it's about respect, you know, a nurturing environment, kindness, you know, and I think I like what Prof. Martinson said, it's about valuing other people's opinions. So I think that's the message kind of we need to get out there to everybody. And there are a lot of blind spots around this. If I may just quickly thank everybody, firstly to our very knowledgeable and esteemed panel. I really think those were outstanding contributions. But certainly very enlightening. There's a lot of insights that I think we can take back to our respective clinical and academic spheres. Then I just want to thank and acknowledge my co-moderators, Prof. Ramlal and Prof. Naidu, for facilitating a smooth running webinar despite all the challenges in terms of the power outages and technical challenges. A great thanks to Batubile Mbuyane and Marianne Francis for the administration and logistic arrangements. And then last but not least, I think we need to thank the Dean and Head of School, Prof. Glover. She conceptualized this and coordinated this webinar. She arranged all the speakers, and I think, like Dr. Cinco-Bogue highlighted, she's setting a great example in taking the lead in advocating against academic bullying. I think before, maybe we can just give Prof. Glover a quick chance to say something. I know she's managed to join us, and then I'll just inform you of some of the upcoming webinars in this series.
Thank you. Thanks, Len. So sorry, I struggled with the load shedding previously. Thank you so much to my colleagues for really making time. And I want to echo what Len has said. And that this is only the beginning of greater conversations, deliberations, because at the end of the day, we want to share our pain, those who have gone through the experience. We also want to support those who have gone through the experience and also guide and heal the perpetrators as well as the victims, as our psychiatrists and psychologists have so well put it, that there's a reason, there's a problem. So this is an opportunity for us to introspect and find out, why are we doing these things? Why are we behaving this way? And I think again, Prof. Ratama was, made a very important point by saying sometimes the victims do report these incidences, but we ignore them. We turn a blind eye. We shove them under the carpet as the leadership and the people in charge. So it's important for us to take these messages home, and because they really have devastating effects on the victims. So colleagues, thank you so much. We'll be having more webinars, as Dr. Prof. Murray will mention that, and we'll have some of the victims sharing their stories in the upcoming webinars, but in a manner that is that will make them heal, and at the same time that's therapeutic and reconciliatory to all of us. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Prof. Glover, for arranging this and raising these important issues. So the next webinar will be on the 23rd of June. That's entitled Creating a Learning Environment on the Clinical Platform to Promote Wellbeing as a Professional Competency. So I'm looking forward to that one. And then we've got a series of other webinars hosted by our college that will be engaging with important, relevant topics for us in a clinical and academic kind of environment. The one Prof. Dlova's mentioned now is Life After the Storm, where we will explore some of the specific examples of academic modeling that presented by the victims. There would be another one after that on diversity, transformation and racism in academia. And then we'll also have an interesting one on reflection and feedback. And we'll look at some guidelines and strategies to engage in effective feedback. So just to close, I would like to thank all our participants. Thank you for attending and engaging so well. There were excellent questions in the Q&A, and I'm sorry we didn't have time to go through all of it, but thanks everyone for joining. And all the panelists, excellent talks. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Can the panelists stay behind, please?
Sure.
We're almost gone.
Please, if you can all put your cameras on. Have they disappeared?
Not yet. We like pictures. Some people are sorting out their hair.
Okay, just hold on.
Where's Prof. Sidat? She's left.
Also, it was such excellent talks, and I'm sure there were so many questions. I felt bad to shut it down, but you know, it's been 2 hours and it was excellent, you know, so I feel a bit bad I had to, but we have to stop sometime. You can't keep on forever. So sorry.
Yeah, no, we'll have a workshop and, you know, reconcile and amalgamate everything.
Can you all see everyone's camera?
Yes, except one.
Can you see Prof. Madenstein, Dr. Cinco?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm having network issues and
I don't see Professor Sidat.
I think
she's left.
Oh, okay.
She's left. Morgan, can you see everyone on your screen?
And please smile, Megan. Megan, please smile.
Please, can you do a photo for me, because I can't see everyone on my screen. There's a problem with my network. If you just press Control Print Screen and then save it on Paint.
Control Print Screen and save it on Paint.
Control Print Screen, and then if you just paste it into Paint. Right now, I can't see any.
It's fine. I took a screenshot for you as well. So
okay.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.